All right, welcome back. We got a special one today. We got a unique one today. So, we're going to talk today about the Dunwich Horror, or the Dunwich Horror, depending on how you want to pronounce it. In this movie, they pronounce it the Dunwich Horror. So, why is this one special? Well, this story is an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story. H.P. Lovecraft is one of my favorite authors. I've read almost every story he's ever done. And this is an adaptation of my absolute favorite H.P. Lovecraft story that he ever wrote. The story came out in the 1920s, and the plot is crazy. If you don't know much about Lovecraft, his stories are often hard to digest. He usually doesn't have very many characters or very much dialogue in his stories. Most of them are just descriptions. Sometimes from the narrator's point of view, and sometimes not. Sometimes his stories are just a dream. Sometimes they make no sense at all. But I always liked the ones that were a little bit easier to grasp. And this story is probably, in a way, the most normal story that he's done. But it's really not very normal. So I was very excited that this story was adapted in 1970. It's probably the most anticipated movie for me for this year, 1970. It came as the fourth ever movie adaptation. The first one was The Haunted Palace. The Haunted Palace featured Vincent Price. It was done in 1963. It was done by AIP, American International Pictures. At the time, no other H.P. Lovecraft story had ever been adapted. So he obviously wasn't very popular. He wasn't popular when he was a writer. I don't think he made much money on basically any of his stories. So when they put out The Haunted Palace, they pretended that it was an Edgar Allan Poe story. The name The Haunted Palace comes from an Edgar Allan Poe poem, I believe. Had basically nothing to do with the plot. The plot was straight up a Lovecraft story. So then later in 1965, we have Die Monster Die, which is the second Lovecraft adaptation. That was adapted from the story The Color Out of Space, which actually a new adaptation, Color Out of Space, just came out with Nicolas Cage like a week ago. Probably 2 weeks ago by the time this video comes out. So we had The Color Out of Space adapted into Die Monster Die, and that was a great movie considering it was 1965. I enjoyed it very much. I actually bought it, and then it came as a double feature on DVD, and this, The Dunwich Horror, was the other feature, both done by the same director. Now, all these movies mentioned were done by AIP, American International Pictures. AIP put out tons of Edgar Allan Poe type stuff. They put out over 450 movies, at least fully them or partially them. A lot of them were with Roger Corman. I've got the Die Monster Die poster here. And here's a picture of Roger Corman. He produced both movies. He produced and he actually directed a lot of Edgar Allan Poe type movies. This movie, The Dunwich Horror, features Dean Stockwell. Take a look at that. All right, this is one of the better images of the movie. Dean Stockwell. I'm trying to think, how do I really want to go about talking about this movie here? Before we get into the plot of the movie or the premise of the movie, if you didn't know, Dean Stockwell is most known for Quantum Leap. There he is, a little bit older. Okay. So, Dunwich Horror. I'm so excited. I turned the movie on. Pretty good opening theme song. You can hear it there in the background. So the credits are great. The credits are animated, which I like a lot. in the credits, you have a man and a woman in a silhouette, and they are running around in a forest, and then you eventually realize that they're running around on a giant monster, and the giant monster eats them. So I couldn't really be much more excited because I know the story, okay? So, the book starts out with an albino woman, an ugly albino woman, as described by H.P. Lovecraft, who is so ugly, no one would have sex with her. But she becomes pregnant. Everyone in the town of Dunwich is confused as to who would have possibly gotten this woman pregnant. People talk about it, but no one asks her because no one talks to her. She's basically a hermit that just lives with her father up on the hill. So she has the baby, okay? Her father is white, she's white and albino, the baby's black, okay? This is the only H.P. Lovecraft story that I know of that talks about race at all, but the baby's black, okay? Now, they changed that one, okay? Because this is supposedly the baby of the albino woman. However, in the movie, he starts off as a full adult. At least half of the book is about the kid growing up. They took all of that out for the movie. Why? I don't know why, because the book is not that long. It's a short story. I think it's like 7 chapters, maybe 8, and that's the full thing. I listened to the book in audio format, and I think it's about the same length as the movie, so I really don't know why they didn't have the whole childhood part, because that's half of the story. So in the book, he's black, and by the time he's a couple weeks old, he looks like he's a 1-year-old, and by the time he's a couple months old, he is the size of a 4-year-old, and by the time he's a year old, he looks like he's a 12-year-old. And then by the time he's an adult, he's like 8.5 feet tall in the book, and he's like inhuman looking, and he's like a monster, and everyone's afraid of him. But he's like smart. He's as smart as a regular person. Like, none of that comes through in the movie. Obviously, look at him. Okay, he's just a regular guy wearing 2 rings. Okay, in fact, in the movie, he's like almost like a cultist, but he's the only one in the cult besides his grandfather. Also, his mother is not even barely in the movie at all, and so that is a missed opportunity. And in the movie, they decided to put Sandra Dee in there as a love interest. And the movie decides that in order to bring about the old ones, which are alien gods from another dimension, you need to sacrifice a virgin and read verses out of the Necronomicon. Now, in the actual book, there is no virgin thing, okay, other than the fact that the mother was possibly a virgin. And there's no woman, there's no love interest. In the book, the kid's a monster, the mother's basically a monster, and no one wants to go near them. In the movie, the kid, who is Dean Stockwell, or his name is Wilbur Wheatley in the story, just like goes to the library, and as soon as he's there, like, Sandra Dee falls in love with him. Okay, weird. So anyway, most of the movie is Wilbur manipulating this girl and then eventually convincing her that she needs to be the virginal sacrifice so that he can bring the old ones back to Earth. If you're not familiar with H.P. Lovecraft, the old ones show up in a lot of his stories. They show up in a different capacity, but basically the idea is that the old ones created all life on Earth, and they're like the true creators. But then after they left. But they're not a god in the sense that they live in heaven. They live in an alternate dimension. If you've ever seen the movie From Beyond, 1986, Stuart Gordon directed From Beyond. scientists tap into other dimensions and become enlightened by actually fusing with these beings from the other dimension. If you've ever seen Reanimator, which is also by Stuart Gordon, both of which I would say are absolutely perfect movies, Reanimator and From Beyond. Reanimator takes place at Miskatonic University. Actually, From Beyond does as well, and so does this one. We've got the town of Dunwich, and we've got the town of Arkham. Arkham is where Miskatonic University is. None of these places exist, but they supposedly are in Massachusetts. Lovecraft himself was from Rhode Island. So he sets most of his stories in New England, which I think is awesome, because I'm from New England. Most of his stories are set in Massachusetts. Some of them take place in the other states. At least one of them takes place in Connecticut, which is cool, except that story's not that great. Some of them take place in Rhode Island, and so on. Anyway, this movie, first of all, disappointing because they left out all the cool parts of the book. But let's talk about this poster here. This poster is amazing. We've got a crazy monster. We've got a monster with so many creatures coming out of his head. We've got snakes. We've got like tentacle arms. We've got weird goat skulls. We've got dragons. We've got like carnivorous plants coming out of his head. All this stuff. Guess how long we get to see this monster in the movie? Like 2 seconds. It's unbelievable. The book, the monster's even crazier than that. In fact, here's a few illustrations based off the book. We've got this guy, okay? That is, well, I'm not going to say exactly who that's supposed to be because I'm going to leave some of the plot for you to discover on your own. And then here's an even better one. This is what we should be getting in the movie, okay? This is what we have in the book. This is a pretty good picture of what the book describes. You can see we've got like hoofs coming out here. We've got weird appendages all over. We've got a claw. We've got a crab claw. We've got like an alligator mouth coming out of there. We've got tentacles down here. Looks like some intestines just spilling out. Look at the size of this thing. This is accurate to the book. I like here that we got a fence at the top of it just to give you a little bit of an idea. Here's a little person so you can see how big the thing was supposed to be. It's crushing a car, okay? The book is so insane, the stuff that happens, and the movie just really dropped the ball. Beyond the plot, okay, the acting was all right. Dean Stockwell is good in it. Sandra Dee is fine. You know, I really can't complain about the acting, but just the story was like totally neutered. It's just so disappointing. You may notice the sound here at the beginning of the movie. I was really into the theme song, but this score is 53 minutes long, and it's literally like the same hook or riff or whatever you want to call it for the entire movie. It's one of those movies, kind of like if you've ever seen Creature from the Black Lagoon. You go to sleep and it's just like stuck in your head because you heard that same tune for the entire movie. They don't change it up at all. They change the instruments. Sometimes it's a keyboard, sometimes it's a flute, sometimes it's trumpets. I think it might be a piano at some point. Sometimes you got little drums in the background, but it's the same song essentially for the entire movie. It just like drills it into your head. Makes you hate it by the end of the movie. So disappointing. There are at least 3 other adaptations of this movie in existence, most of them not until the end of the first decade of the 2000s. There's a remake, I guess you could call. I wouldn't really call it a remake because it's just a different adaptation of the book that came out in 2009. I haven't watched it yet. I noticed it was made by someone who did some other Lovecraft stories. That person also made a weird Wizard of Oz adaptation where it focuses on the witches of Oz, and I would like to see that, although none of this guy's movies got anything close to a positive review. I'd like to see it. And Christopher Lloyd is the wizard in this version of Wizard of Oz. Amazing, I never heard of it until like yesterday, but it's out there. There's also another, I don't know if it's a real adaptation, but there's a movie from 2008 called Beyond the Dunwich Horror. And that one, it's got a bunch of crazy creatures on the cover. So I kind of have my fingers crossed, but the fact that it was in 2008 and the fact that the cover itself is really bloody makes me worried that it's going to be like a little bit of monsters and then a bunch of torture or something stupid, because that's what happened in 2008. Everything was trying to rip off Saw. Anyway, beyond that, the most promising version of the Dunwich Horror, it came out in 2007, and it is a Japanese stop-motion animation version of the Dunwich Horror, and I'm crossing my fingers that that one's actually good. And as I mentioned, The Color Out of Space just came out last week or 2 weeks ago, and that was done by Richard Stanley, who only ever did 2 other fictional movies, which were Hardware in 1990 and Dust Devil in 1992. He took a long break, and now in 2019, 2020, he came out with The Color Out of Space, and his next movie is confirmed to be The Dunwich Horror. Hopefully that comes out by the end of this year, if not next year. He's known for practical effects in Hardware. They actually built a robot. Imagine Terminator, but fully in the future with no time travel, and the killer robot is a real robot. It's pretty sick. I've heard that the new Color Out of Space has really good practical effects, so I'm hoping that with this resurgence in the past couple of years of 80s horror worship and practical effects worship, with movies like The Void and Wolf Cop and others, I am hoping that his version of the Dunwich Horror will finally deliver to us something worthy of the original short story. So, that's it for this one. I was so excited for this one, and it really fell flat. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I give it some credit for the creators taking my favorite Lovecraft story and trying to make something out of it. I'd like to think that the producers and the studio tried to tone it down so that people would actually like it. But today in 2020, we need the insane monsters of the original story. All right, this one was long, but I really had a lot to say about this story. So hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.